Well, hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and I feel a bit odd being at episode 39 of Revolutionary Girl Utena for a couple reasons. One, because it feels weird that we're at the end. It feels like the end, but it doesn't. And I know I have a movie and a manga left to go, and then we'll do the live stream in May at some point. So I was like, okay, yeah, it doesn't feel like the end. But also, I pulled up this episode today, and it's from Anthony, who, thank you, Anthony, for getting me the movie and the files for the show. I'm so appreciative. But this episode, when I pulled up the file, it is formatted different than all the others. And it's like almost a minute shorter. So I don't know how to feel about that. It's weird. It's bizarre. I'm like, okay. But who knows? We'll find out. I've got some comments I want to talk about before we start. These are comments related to episode 35 and 36 from YouTube and Patreon. I'm definitely going to keep answering comments as they come in before the movie and as they come in before the manga review, and then anything else that are commented on, I will go over in May, because I want to do a live stream in May to talk about the other manga that I was sent by Zikature the Immortal. I'm going to be looking at it while I'm going on my trip with my team for our speech nationals, and then I'm going to come back in May and do a live stream and talk about Utena as a whole. And by that time, I will have seen everybody's comments and been able to process and kind of, because I try to tell people, as you've noticed, the last several weeks, I've been like having very emotional reactions. And so I feel like maybe people don't, I say it all the time, but I don't know if it clicks with people, that when I'm watching the reaction, my thoughts afterwards are like immediate. They're immediate, they're emotional, they're genuine, they're just what I'm thinking. And so, but the downside of that is that sometimes you don't have time to reflect and process necessarily. So when I come back the following week, I'm like, oh yeah, I've thought about it a little more. Here's my extra thoughts. And so I want to have a little bit of time after the manga, after the revolution, to think over some of those things. So we'll see how that goes. But with that being said, we need to talk about some of these comments, especially for episode 35. 35 was a frustrating week. 35 and 33 were probably the worst weeks of the series. So I'm glad to get those weeks behind me, if I'm being honest with y'all. Rosie Gaga for episode 35 says, I know it won't change anything for you, and I'm definitely not trying to, but I just want to add my personal feelings. I don't think the writers are necessarily trying to sweep what happened under the rug or downplay its severity. I feel like if anything, it makes it more sinister, because something so terrible happened and yet life goes on. It's sickening, but a grim reality. And here's my thing. It always bothers me, because I had the same argument with Berserk, and I was trying to think, how do I articulate? Because I don't know if I articulated it well in Berserk, but if you are a victim of sexual assault and you are watching a fictional animated TV show, the last thing you really need reminded of is the grim reality. And that's just how I feel. I'm like, I'm not watching this show to be like, did you know this is how people feel when they're assaulted? And I'm like, yeah, kind of. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I just, having gone through it, yeah, I figured it out. And so I just like, in my mind, the media that we watch and the things we create, whether we realize it or not, it influences our society. It influences the way that people think. So if you can show something horrible happening to someone, but then they react to it in a realistic way and go forward with it, then that is influencing the way that we look at reality. One of the things I hate the most is when they show a sexual assault and people are like, well, that's just the way the world is. I'm like, but it doesn't have to be if people alter their mindsets. And when you show a piece of media and you treat it like it's just reality, then it becomes normalized. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And it's not that I'm mad the show is showing it as a reality, but the way she reacted, from my experience, is not realistic. And that was my beef with it. So I'm not dumb, y'all. I know what they're trying to do. I just don't like it. Again, I have to say this a lot on this channel, because I don't think people understand the nuance of it. You can understand something and not agree with it or approve of it. And there's a big difference there. I think people believe that when you understand something, you agree with it. You do not have to do that, ever. So I want to get that comment out of the way, because it was triggering my emotions all over again, and I just wanted to get it out of the way. JP Anime Fix, a Japan Anime Fix, says for episode 35, I get the frustration towards Anthy. In the show's defense, it was aired in the late... A lot of people want to defend this show so hardcore, and I get it. It's your precious angel baby. You grew up with this show. It's your heart and soul. I get it. There are shows that I defend too, even though I know that they are problematic and wrong in some ways. I get it. And they're dated in some ways. I get it. But in the show's defense, it was aired in the late 1990s in Japan, so it's no surprise the cultural expectations it was interrogating might feel out of place to a modern viewer from a different culture. I think that's one of the big things, too, is that I keep comparing this to modern anime from 30 years later that have become so progressive and so, like, nuanced, and they just handle the subject matter in a better way. And I forget that this is from the 90s when it's a little bit dated. Some of the stuff seems very like duh, and that's because it was handling this for the first time. So I feel like sometimes I forget we have to go back and look at this from a historical perspective, that this show was breaking molds, it was breaking ground, but in comparison to now, it does feel a little bit dated sometimes, especially in some of its symbolism and themes. I'm like, we've come a long way since this. From what I've heard, Anthy was a very divisive character in the early years too. I can imagine. She's done awful things and perpetuates the cycle of abuse, but she too is a victim of abuse, which complicates her role. A lot of folks still have the mindset of a perfect victim, especially if the victim in question is a woman. So I think in some ways her character is meant to make the viewers confront that. I don't think she should be given a free pass, but her abuse does give insight about the way that she is. And I agree the same way. Again, I've dealt with this in so many series. I feel like some people, if they think that if the person is a victim, they're excused from all things. And that's not necessarily true. No, just because you're a victim doesn't mean you get to be an awful person. That is not a free pass. And just because I've been a victim, that doesn't give me a free pass to be a terrible person. It just doesn't. And so I hold Anthy accountable as a character. I understand what she's going through, believe me. And I feel for her in that respect, but I get mad at her because I think of how would I feel if someone in that position treated me like that. And I'm just like, that's not cool. And so I feel like we as the audience should be okay with holding her responsible and accountable and saying, yeah, this sucks what happens to you, but why are you just sitting around letting it happen? And of course, the thing that most people will comment is, well, people are like that in reality, and that happens. And I'm like, yeah, I get it, but this is a fictional show. I can hold Anthy responsible and expect more of her as a fictional character. And because it's like, okay, if you're imitating real life, what do you do with that? That's your role as a writer, is to take that character and then do something with it. So I hope this episode or the movie or manga does something with Anthy to make her be like, okay, here's where her arc was. This is where her character was, because we'll talk about it later. But yeah, about Utena's behavior around Akio. While I interpreted it differently and strongly disagree with the comment that the show is saying Akio did. Again, I don't think that the show, people keep thinking that. And I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that I know the show is saying that what Akio is doing is not right, but based on how people still act today, I don't know if it's changing mindsets. You know what I mean? I don't know if the show is making people go, I guess I won't do that because that's a bad thing to do. I don't know. I don't know if this show is going far enough to show how bad it is and that we shouldn't normalize it. I don't know if it's doing that. And I've seen other shows that did go that length and did go that distance in a very effective way. So seeing this in comparison is kind of like, but what else are you doing? Right? And we still have to see where this show goes the next couple weeks to see what more it does with that. Yeah. And then it says, I can see why you have a different take on it. I don't really have a different take. I just expect more of it. I think people are misunderstanding what I'm trying to say, and it's frustrating because the genre that Utena is interrogating and playing with does have some pretty toxic tropes. Exactly. I'm going to stop talking about it. I don't think people are understanding me, and it's frustrating. Anyway, damn, why am I getting emotional reading these comments? Fuck. Anyway. I was like, I'm going to sit down here today and not cry reading these comments for episode 35 because it's just, I don't know, y'all. I feel like people are not understanding what I'm getting at, and they put words that are different than what I'm meaning in my mouth, and they're like, well, this is what you're saying, and I'm like, it's not. It's very frustrating. Anyway, how do you say that? Tind Revervine 2553 said, here are some thoughts about the poppies. So they had some, God, I thought I was going to be okay watching this this morning. Why? They had some extra thoughts about the poppies to go along with H Banana 7s from last week, so I felt like that was important to mention. As an opiate, the poppy symbolizes morbid slumber, consolation, and oblivion. As a wild flower, it's seen as an ephemer flower, yet strong species coming back every year. Oh my God. Sorry. I was not expecting to be this way this morning, honestly. Is it an attribute of Demeter in Greek myth? It is an attribute of Demeter in Greek mythology, but in the eyes of Akio, they are to be picked and enjoyed for his pleasure. Yeah, that's been pretty on the nose so far in the series, that Akio, what he's doing this for. On the other hand, his field of poppies is a deception. There is no care from him to make them grow, as opposed to Anthy's roses. They grow on their own. They only last a few days, and there is no eternity, which I thought that was interesting. I liked that symbolism a lot, because you have Anthy, who spent all that time cultivating all the roses and growing them, and then Akio's done none of that work, so there is no, like, eternal quality to them. A literal labyrinth trap, where Utena could just walk off straight through the flowers, but won't. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I really like that symbolism, so thank you, Tind, for saying that. God, I read these comments beforehand and was like, I'm not going to get emotional reading that. I'm not going to be triggered. And then... So Lilith Cole for episode 35 says, but exactly who is Akio and Dios, and the intentions of them is sort of the liminal space of them in that sort of liminal space in Utena's memories is a huge question. It could be interpreted so many ways. Yeah, and that's the thing too. Like, I'm totally fine with people disagreeing with my viewpoint, but I get frustrated when people are like, your viewpoint's wrong. And I'm like, it's fiction. I have a master's degree in this. Thank you very much. And we know enough from, and I don't mean to sound like humble brag with that, but I'm just like, when people try to school me on literature, I'm like, bitch, where's your degree in it? Did you just watch a YouTube video where somebody explained what Utena means? I'm like, and I'm not meaning to be a bitch about it, but I get frustrated when people, it's okay to say if you disagree, but I have seen some comments where people are like, well, you don't understand the meaning of this. And I'm like, it's fiction. You can interpret it any way you like to. Unless the author comes out and specifically says this is what it means, we can interpret it any way that we like. So I don't like people trying to school me on if I'm wrong. That just, I mean, how would you feel if somebody did that to you? And I know you're watching me give a different opinion, but I'm not ever saying that's what it means. I'm just saying that's my interpretation. So it's thick skin for YouTube commenters and YouTube creators. I tell you what. It says, it seems like Utena, like telling Utena about Anthy is a kind thing to do for Anthy. But he already says that he is no longer the person that she sacrificed herself for. The ages of Anthy and Akio and the timeline of when those prior events happened is too cloudy to make sense of. And you're right that given that we're looking at this form from the future, it's hard to tell what the true or true form even means in this show. Yeah, and so I'm glad Lilith Cole brought that up, that this show is so abstract in some ways that it is hard to get like a specific time or space or understanding of it. But that's kind of the point, is that it is left up to interpretation. I get very frustrated. This show has made me have a mean spirit sometimes, because that's not me. That's not who I am, but sometimes the comments do that. Anyway, so we get on to episode 36. I'm glad we're past episode 35, because those comments were roughsville. But anyway, and I'm using my glasses wipe as a handkerchief. So El Freya for episode 36 says, I'll admit I love to see reactors gush over shows, but at the same time, it feels shallow if they're unable to criticize major faults when they exist. Thank you. I can't be that fake YouTube reactor that's like, oh my God, it's the best amazing thing ever all the time if it's not. You know, I mean, granted, there are shows in this channel that I am like a fangirl 100% for and will just gush about all day long because but I'm going to be genuine with you all. I'm going to be real. If there's something that frustrates me or something I think is dumb or I don't like, I'm going to tell you it. I'm not going to just be fake for views. So that's just how I am. I watch a fair number of reactors, and definitely some stand out more than others for certain genres, as their personalities can fit the subject matter better. But the effort that you take in breaking down the episodes, thank you very much. They compliment me on breaking down the episodes, so thank you, Elfreya. I really appreciate that. I don't think that I think I just kept this comment up in front to take it off the map, but Elfreya was very kind, so thank you. I'm not going to humble brag on there, but thank you. Your words were very kind and considerate. Zanetcho for episode 36 says, it's interesting how he seems to have the most understanding of how the dueling system works, meaning Toga, after Akio and Anthy, and comes to the conclusion that keeping Utena from being the final duelist would save her. But Toga is so deeply enshrined in the system that the only way he can see to help her is defeating her, even after Saionji asks if he's just going to duel her like Akio wants. There's some interesting things to think about in regards to Toga and Akio versus Anthy and Akio. A weird web of simultaneous victimhood and complicity. At least Toga tries to help, but being vague does not work with Utena. No, Utena is pretty thick. She's pretty dense. You gotta be as face forward as possible or girl is just gonna ignore you. But yeah, I do appreciate Toga for at least trying to do something. I guess even though he's being manipulated and he's entrenched in the system and there is more he could do, but I appreciate he's trying to help. And then Zanetcho also points this out, saying, there's also an interesting parallel during the duel itself, when Toga promises to save Utena and we flash back to the elevator with Utena promising to save Anthy. What does it mean to save someone? We talked about that last week. Toga tries to save Utena while upholding the same prince and princess system that Akio is using against her. And Utena tries to save Anthy from the duelists without realizing that they've never been as big of a threat as Akio is. They're both trying to help by positioning themselves as saviors, but neither of them fully wraps their head around what would truly help the person they're trying to save. Yes, and we talked about this last week, that Anthy has to want to save herself. Anthy has to want to be saved. And you can tell someone that you're going to save them all day long and be that support system for them, but if they're not going to accept your support system, unfortunately, it's not going to do a lot of good. And I think that's why I'm so frustrated with Anthy, is that there's literally someone in front of her that loves her, that's like, I'm here to help you. And if Anthy has a problem with the prince mentality and the prince way of thinking, she should effing speak up and say something, but she doesn't. And that's frustrating. And if it is a product of being the rose bride and some kind of magical restraint, then that needs to be a little bit better established. But if it's just symbolism, it's like, we got the symbolism 40 episodes ago. You can change things up and work off of that now. We got it a long time ago. Now make it work. So we'll see if they do that this week. And then Oliver Jajado for episode 36 says, more focus on Toga in the episode's commentary, which makes sense because this is like the last episode we really get Toga focus, and thus opens the doorway of night. It was determined from the very initial production stages, back when the show was still thought of as a normal shoujo manga anime. Oh, it was thought of that at one time? That Akio, Otari, was the prince. Who then was Toga? I racked my brains over it. He was a cool guy, but he wasn't the man of her destiny. In which case, who was he? Well, there was one thing I did know. He had ambition, and that was the keyword. I'm always an ally to girls. Okay. Toga once said those words to the girl in the coffin. And since then, he's been continually tested by those words. See, Toga is a cutely single-minded guy. Yeah, okay. It's hard to tell sometimes when Ikuhara is being sarcastic or when he's being serious. So you all can give me your interpretations of that commentary down below. But, oh, I didn't mean for that to be so emotional and heated. So I'm sorry, y'all. I apologize. I did not step in with that this week. But episodes 35 and 33 are just very triggering for me. So I just... and I don't know, it does take a toll on you as a reactor to read comments where people are not getting what you're saying, and you're just like, how else can I say it and get it? Because when they say some of these comments, I'm like, no, I agree with you. We're not in disagreement. I don't know what's happening, but it is, I'm glad to be at the final episode. I truly am. I still have a lot of issues with this series from the last act. Like, up until Ruka, this was such a great series. And then from episode 31 on, I've had some issues with it. But I'm trying to be open-minded because we still have the movie and we still have the After the Revolution manga. So I'm going to be real with you all if stuff frustrates me, but please know that I may go back and reflect when we do the live stream, and I may change my mind in future weeks. And some people's comments have been really enlightening, so I appreciate that. Like, some of the ones I read for this intro, I was like, oh yeah, that does change my perspective a little bit, and I hadn't thought of it that way. So that is helpful. Just be kind. The mods have had to keep me from reading some people's comments because they're like, they're just being mean. And I was like, there is no sense of that. If you don't like what I'm saying to the point where you're being mean in your comments, then just go somewhere else. I don't know what else to say. There's, if you disagree with me that violently, then it's like, I don't know what to tell you. But I'm also a Taurus, so changing my mind is not going to happen. I'm sorry, I'm so stubborn, and I'm very aware of my stubbornness. Like if people are, it's like coaxing a baby deer. They're like, here's this idea I have. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. That completely changes my way of thinking. But if somebody's like, this is what it means, bitch. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm hyped up this morning. Maybe because it's the final episode, and I kind of don't want it to be the final episode, but I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be a hot doo-doo mess this morning. So anyway, I've talked for 20 minutes, God. We're going to get started with episode 39 of Revolutionary Girl Utena. Thanks for following me this far. I have good vibes in my shirt, so hopefully that will help, but I'm a little bit nervous about this format being different, and maybe that's my anxiety coming through, being like, why is this format different? Why we're shaving a minute off? We might not be getting the OP or ED if we've shaved off time. We'll see. So in any case, we're going to start Revolutionary Girl Utena episode 39. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And I'll see you all on the other side. Ooh, I had to go refill my coffee for this one. Okay. I feel like maybe I seemed really disappointed in that reaction, but okay. I think I want to talk about, I want to be open-minded about this ending and about the things that I like about it, because I do like some things about this episode. I do like some things about this ending. I am more frustrated than anything, though, with how it ends. And I know you all watching probably have come from the mindset of that this is the best series ever. Romania, don't trash talk my series. It's my childhood memories and it's everything I love. And I don't want to do that, but I'm going to be real with you. I'm going to be real. There are some parts of this I was like, really? And we still have the movie and we still have the manga. So we'll see. And I'm sure if I process, the one thing I don't want to see in the comments, it is a comment that I loathe. There are 2 comments I loathe when it comes to stories like these. One comment is, well, you don't understand now, but you'll understand. I'm 36, bitch. I got this with Berserk and I got this with a few other series. And so I'm sorry if I'm projecting based on those, but I just see these comments coming. I see somebody being like, well, I didn't get it my first time around either. Like, that comment is so condescending. So if you're thinking about making that comment, please don't. It's so bad. I hate it. And the other one we'll talk about when we get to Akio, because I can foresee this comment being made. And I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't foresee comments being made before they're being made. But this has happened with 2 other series before when I didn't quite agree with parts of it that I think people will think is a masterpiece. And so I shouldn't be in that mindset. I shouldn't be in that mindset of predicting comments before they happen, because they might not. So we just won't do that. We won't do that. Maybe y'all weren't thinking of commenting on that. But I want to do what was great. I want to do what was great. I want to do what was frustrating, because I don't want to say it was bad. I just want to say that it was frustrating. And then that's pretty much it. I wouldn't say that there was any parts that were like, you were like, okay, but the parts that were great versus the parts that were frustrating. I think that's we're going to scoot this over here. I think that was the best way to kind of go about it and saying like, okay, what did I like and what was I like about? Because there was definitely some in this episode. Finally, we do get no OP. I personally think it would have been better to have gotten halfway through the OP and just cut it right down the middle and then just immediately go to where we were at, but that's fine. That's hard to do. I was like, okay, you saved the no OP moment for the very end. That's good. I appreciate that. I like that we had that little subtle and even the thing. It felt very special that we got this special opening for the final episode. It felt very final. I know we still had the movie and the manga, but it felt very final in this moment, so that was good. So I think maybe some of my disappointment comes from me theorizing what would happen in the story and coming up with all of these plot lines, and then they didn't happen, and I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna do this instead. Because I had thought that maybe Anthy and Utena would have been working together, because, they had that whole conversation on the rooftop where they finally communicated and came to an understanding. And then Anthy said, nope. And then Anthy said, no, actually, even though we did have a heart-to-heart, I'm still going to stab you in the back because of reasons. And I guess subverting expectations, I guess. So Anthy did stab her. I'm curious why they didn't show any blood, because unless it was a metaphorical stabbing, it was more symbolic than anything, because this entire dueling arena and stuff are all illusions. So it's not real. So it's just a metaphorical stabbing. But in the other duels, we've seen blood. So I would think that there would be blood, but there wasn't no blood on that sword. I don't know if it was for censorship or it was all supposed to be a metaphor for whatever reason. I guess we know that Anthy, and I'm not going to really put this under frustrating or great, but Anthy's whole situation is that we've established this last couple episodes. She loves Akio because that's her brother, but she also loves Anthy. So there's that as well. And she, as anyone would in a situation, and I'm like I said in the intro, I'm a Taurus, so I get it. There is a fear of change. There is a fear of change. There is a fear of the unknown. There is a fear that Anthy doesn't know what Akio would do. Like, does Anthy believe that they can't defeat Akio? So she was like, even if she wants to stab Akio in the back, she knows that there's a chance that it's not going to work. And that it's, nothing's going to, I was like, you girls could tag team him though. I was like, you could tag team him and do that. But there's a sense of this fear of the unknown, this fear of change, this fear of, I'm like, but she's not going to get rejected. Utena said how many times that she loves her? Well, I mean, here's the thing. Utena has not said that she loves her, but she said how many times she would support her. But then you see Utena going with Akio, and I guess you would get, like, is this girl serious? Or I think, so we have Anthy stabbing Utena. I guess my frustrating part here is, and it's not that it's bad, but her stabbing after the conversation, after the conversation where we talked about all of our woes, all of our problem, we had that miscommunication talk, and then she still stabbed her anyway. And it was like, okay. And so she still stabbed her. It was still a thing. And then I thought for a hot second, I liked the carousel, the merry-go-round. If we're going to talk about the symbolism, I do like the idea of the merry-go-round. I like the merry-go-round is this idea, in my mind, this idea of this cycle. Again, we talk about revolutions. We talk about cycle. The cycle, talking about childhood, because when you're a kid, you go in the merry-go-round. And this idea of repetition. That things just the cycle stays the same. Everything stays the same. The world stays the same. Blah, 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 blah. And so I did like the merry-go-round. I thought the merry-go-round in the background was a really good symbolism because it was very ominous and just threatening the whole time. And you're like, oh, a merry-go-round's threatening. Now every time I say a merry-go-round, I'm going to think of Revolutionary Girl Utena. I also liked the idea of Anthy's dress coming out and making like a rose in that moment. I thought that was really good. And then of course the thorn pierces Utena. I thought for a hot second, here's the most frustrating thing. Well, we let's get to the duel first. We got the student council. The student council's frustrating in this for the record. Because they're like, oh, I don't know why they said don't take off the ring. Nanami already did it. It didn't make a difference. It's just the idea that it's just a representation. It's just metaphorical. Because Nanami's over here like, I already took my ring off. Nanami's like, I already took my ring off. I'm not even doing anything with y'all. Which we'll talk about that at the very end. That was a frustrating moment. But she's like, I don't care about any of this anymore. But Toga is still tied to conventions. Toga is still tied. The idea that Toga is still tied to the world that Akio is within. So the duelists are tied. I guess we'll have the duelists. The duelists are still tied to Akio's world. They're still tied to the world that Akio is, which is so weird because they just, they've been through the ringer with it, but they're still complicit with it. And they're like, she still represents us dueling. Until everything is finally settled, we must remain duelists. The thing that's frustrating, and we'll talk about it at the very end, I'm not going to write it on Whiteboard Kun yet, but they never leave. They just stay and perpetuate the cycle over and over again. And I was like, the duelists aren't going to walk. I wanted everyone to walk away from Akio. I wanted them all to be like, nope, we're leaving, but they decide to stay. Okay, cool, I guess. And then Nanami's like, well, I've already taken off mine. I liked that when we had the lighting, the dramatic lighting, I thought the gags at the beginning and end were really funny. I thought it was really funny. I thought that the gags with the guys at the end, the three guys that follow Nanami around, that part was really funny. And I loved it was all this dramatic lighting, and you're like, oh, where'd the dramatic lighting come from? Is it a fire? And then you hear the crackling, and then you pan down, and it's 4 kebabs for the 4 of them roasting on a spigot, like, just lambs to the slaughter. They just keep on roasting, and Nanami's like, I'm not part of this. I've taken mine off. I just want to forget about this whole thing. And that was kind of frustrating too. The idea she just wants to forget, because the idea of memory versus moving forward, I guess that was a really frustrating part for me with the duelists, because it's like Juri talks about, she's like, Nanami's like, I just want to forget this and move on. I just want to forget about it. And I'm like, I was frustrated for Nanami in that moment, because I'm like, you shouldn't forget. Like, you need to remember these things in order to move forward. The whole point is that if you remember something bad that's happened to you, you're not going to want to get in that circumstance to repeat it in the future. That's what you've got to do to keep moving. And they're like, can we ever forget? And that's when Juri speaks up and says, oh, that reminds me, the boy's name. I've forgotten it now. I don't know why. It felt kind of weird for Juri to say that, 1, she had an older sister that we find out in the last episode. 2, she nearly drowns. And 3, this boy jumps in to try to save her. So it reminded me kind of Nanami pushing the cat in the box and it drowning down the river. That part it kind of reminded me about. But then it also reminded me of, like, was it literally like Akio Dios as the prince saving her and then he ends up drowning instead? Which would have been an interesting twist if it was the prince ends up drowning to save her and that was part of it. That would have been interesting, right? That would have been neat to have that twist. And then, because Nanami looks so sad in that moment, she's like, luckily for her, a nearby adult managed to rescue my sister. So the prince didn't actually save her. It was an adult that saved her in that moment. The prince tried to, but the boy who had jumped in to save her was washed away. So there's this kind of metaphor about, again, this series has beat over the head. I don't know how many episodes now, but it's like, you shouldn't be a prince because, which we're going to talk about. It's like, you shouldn't be a prince. You basically, although in this case, the girl didn't save herself. She ended up getting saved by an adult, but it's like, no good deed goes unpunished. And they're like, my sister soon forgot the boy's name that saved her. And I thought she was such a cold-hearted person, but now that I think about it, as hard as I try, I can't think of his name either. So I was like, is that foreshadowing that they're going to forget about Utena? Because then Saionji looks over to Toga, and Toga looks away. It's like they're both looking at each other like, are we going to forget Utena? Are we going to forget all the things that happened? Is that our destiny to forget? And I'm like, if y'all know this is about to happen, just walk away. Like, why do you choose to stay? Because then Mickey does that too. And they're all just standing there and they're like, hey. And then Nanami's like, hey, why did you tell us that story? And it's like, so they're going to forget about Utena. So the idea that they forget Utena is really frustrating because I'm like, I just expected the duelists to do more. I really expected them to have more of a plot line at the end. Since episode 31, they really haven't done anything for 7 episodes. And they were kind of integral to the entire plot up until the final act. And then they're just kind of just placeholders that they get a badminton scene where they talk and then they say, oh, we're going to forget about Utena, stay part of the system. And that's all that they do. And I was really frustrated by that because I guess I expected them to have a bigger role in this series. And then for them to just casually forget and go back to the world they've been living in it was a little disappointing. I'm not going to lie. It was a little disappointing. So then we go back to Akio asking for the sword. And I will say another thing that I wasn't really crazy about in this episode is the pacing of it. The pacing of it was really off. Like there were parts that drug on way too long. And I get that they're trying to build up tension. But I was like, is she going to stab him with the sword? Is she going to try to take charge of the situation? No. And then once you realize she's not going to do that, you're like, okay, then let's move on and get to the next scene. And I didn't want to feel that way, but I was just like, the pacing was off. And I was like, I think I would have liked it better. It wasn't as smooth as it's been in previous episodes. And another thing is that the last 3 or 4 episodes, they have hammered the same symbolism about the prince and about Akio. And I'm like, if you're not going to say anything different or challenge and subvert it, then move on to something else, I guess. But I was just tired of Akio running his mouth and saying the same shit over again. And so he's like, well, you ended up bringing sorrow to your friend. And I'm like, and she's like, yes, I did. And then he tries to do the mansplaining thing that is also very predatory, where he's like, oh, well, it was actually my fault, I guess. And he's like crying his tears. I guess in this moment, a big frustration to me is Anthy not saving herself. And then the ending, which we'll get to the ending. I don't know. I was really frustrated that this entire series, every opportunity that Anthy has had to stand up for herself, to save herself, she has not done, has actively avoided, and it's been very frustrating. And then at the very end, she's like, I'm going. And it's supposed to be, and I know that for some people it's this big dramatic moment, and I know the symbolism of it. The symbolism I love. The symbolism of the victim realizing they can walk away is so powerful. And it's so important. But here's the problem, is that the speech team that I coach, one of the girls on it, she does a poetry program. And in the competition that we coach, it's a program where you can take either multiple poems and you can build an argument with them, or you can take a specific poem and build an argument with it. Well, she does a specific poem. And her poem, and she has a girlfriend, and her poem is called Into the Dream House. And it's a collection of poetry work. I can't think of the author's name right now, but it's called Into the Dream House. You can look it up. But the whole poem is about a girl in an abusive relationship with another girl. And it's powerful. But the point of the poem is that so often victims don't realize that they had a choice to begin with. The whole point of the poem is that you forget as a victim you ever had the option of leaving. And by the end of the poem, she realizes this option and she leaves. And it's kind of like what Anthy does here. The problem is, I've read that poem and I'm very influenced by it, but throughout the poem, the character that chooses the option to leave has all of these monologues where she through poetry goes back and forth talking about why she's still with this person and why she loves this person and why they're problematic, but she still stays with them because of this reason and this reason. And then her fears about what could happen when she leaves, and her fears about what would happen if she fails, and her fears about all this. And the poem lays that all out beautifully in this kind of choose your own adventure format. It's so good. And I think because I've read something that handles the topic better, I want to feel for Anthy, and I felt sorry for her the entire series. But for her to go from 0 to 180 at the ending of the story, for her to be like, nope, 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 nope. Oh, hey, I'm leaving. It just doesn't ring as powerful to me as if she had given us, the audience, moments where, because every time she was about to talk about reservations that she had, she just cut herself off. And so we, the audience, were never given the chance to fully get into her mindset, to understand her, to understand what she's thinking, to understand what's led her to these points. So instead, she just does all of these things. And then we'll talk about Utena's influence. And then at the very end, she's like, okay, I'm leaving. And I was like, on the one hand, I like that she didn't give Akio a monologue. I like that she didn't explain herself. She just walked away and left Akio standing, which we'll talk about Akio. But I love that. But I didn't feel it was earned. I felt like it was just a, look what she did. And I'm like, but she needed to work a little bit harder to get to that point. And I don't mean that in a bad way. And I know people are going to be like, but she suffered so much, and she has, and I feel sorry for her, but it doesn't feel earned. It just feels like she casually just went, actually, I'm going. And I'm like, I don't know. It did not feel earned to me compared to the rest of the series where we've been waiting for her to make a stand and to save herself. She made Utena go through hell and back to get to her. And then she was like, oh, yeah, I think I'll leave. And I'm like, and I know what it represents. And the symbolism is beautiful. And I'm so glad she left. I was like, thank God she left, because she needed to get out of that abusive relationship. It's just like she made Utena go through hell and back for her before she realized, I can save myself. And as someone who's been wanting her to save herself for the last 6 episodes, I was like, oh, you do it after the fact? After all this? I was disappointed in that. I love the symbolism, but I do not feel it was earned. It did not hit me as powerful as I'm sure it hit some people, because I was just like, girl, what? And then there's Akio, who's over here like, I just want to skip the Akio parts because he's just like, boo-hoo, poor me. And Anthy's like, well, you chose this path. And it's like, yes, he did. And he's like, and knowing everything of you, or he says that of her. And he's like, I love you, and blah, blah. And she's like, yes, big bro. And he's like, give me the sword. And she actually gives it to him. I really wanted her to just stab him with it and say, here you go. And just make him stab himself. But nope, that's not what happens. So we get to the gate. And Utena's like, you know, why? Like, him and me, I still love you, and I'm still doing all this stuff for you. And she's like, you're stubborn and reckless, and you let me have a small taste of true friendship. And Utena's like, I thought it was more than friendship. Anthy's actions. Anthy frustrated me so much in this that when she finally leaves, yeah, she looks super cute, and she's in pink, because of course she's in pink, because it's Utena's colors. We're supposed to feel so happy for for Anthy leaving. And I do. I'm just like, you couldn't have made this decision, I don't know, before Utena was hospitalized. It felt just like, oh, you made this girl suffer so much for you, and then was like, I'm gonna go. Grumble, 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 grumble. So yeah, so all the swords coming up that surround Anthy are the swords of all the people hating her and all of this. And I don't know, I felt like, and the swords like come up to stab him, but they deflect off of him. I get the symbolism of it. I like that it makes kind of an hourglass. The swords come up in the form of a triangle. Like there's the where the gate is. and the swords come up like this, and then they make this circle around Anthe, and she's in the center of it, and it's just like an hourglass. I do like that. I think that the symbolism of it's really cool. And of course, the sword. One thing that is kind of frustrating is we don't really ever get a lot of confirmation of the mythology behind it. And look, this is just a mild frustration that is like, okay, I needed something, I guess, because again, I talk about Neon Genesis Evangelion. In that series, it gets into kind of like a mythological, surreal nature, but it explains it enough where it's like, here's what it is. And you're like, oh, okay. And then even if it's abstract or weird, you're like, well, they did say it was like this, so that's fine. Here, they never really, and it's fine. This is a personal nitpick. It's fine if they leave things completely ambiguous. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's fine if they leave it completely ambiguous and never explain if the swords are all metaphorical, if they're just part of the illusion, because again, we're in the tower, so this whole thing is an illusion to begin with. If it's still all illusionary, if Anthe just stripped off her clothes and stood in the center of the room and this is all an illusion again. Because last episode they were like, oh, it was all an illusion, but then all this fantastical stuff happens, but it's all metaphorical and not real. And it's kind of like, we're not going to confirm what's real and what's not, but just assume it's all fake. And it's like, it kind of, last episode takes a little bit of the magic away, because when you know this is all just an illusion, it kind of is like, oh, it's all a metaphor and symbolism. Okay. And none of it's real. Okay. Except for Utena's pain and the fact that Akio beats the shit out of her. So that's pretty much it. If you read between the lines, and we'll talk about that. But it's a personal nitpick for me. I would like a little bit more. If you're going to go the fantastical route and have weird shit happen, either you need to not explain any of it, or you need to explain it. And the series tries to have its cake and eat it too. And I don't know if that's as effective as it could have been. Because yeah, and then the thing about the witch, of her being the witch, I do like the Sailor Moon connection where she's holding the sword that represents the love of her brother and the love that she has. And, you know, every anime is like, love's a curse and all of this. And I do love the Sailor Moon-esque. It felt very Sailor Galactica. It reminded me of the last Sailor Moon season. I liked that a lot. I thought that was good. But seeing her stabbed over and over and over again with the swords, I hated that Utena was tortured watching Anthe get stabbed again and not be able to do anything. And again, if the point of the story is for Anthe to save herself, and that's what she has to do because the concept of the prince is very problematic and not appropriate, then making Utena go through all of that struggle when there was really no point. Like she didn't, like, and I know there was a point. I'm getting that, but making her go through all of that struggle when Anthe could have just been like, I wanted Anthe to tell Utena, I have to save myself. You can't save me. And I felt like Utena went through all of that struggle. And I suppose Utena did find satisfaction in reaching her at the end. But when it still did nothing, and Anthe is the one that had to walk away in the end, and you put Utena through all of that, I was just like, damn. You put this girl, I don't know. I know this is supposed to be super romantic and they're holding hands at the end, but if we're talking about realism, if I was Utena and this girl put me through all of that, and then at the end, I'm like hospitalized and I'm like, how'd you get away from Akio? And she was like, oh, I just walked away. I'd have been like, we need to see different people. We can be friends, but I'm going to go find another girl. I say that because I feel like, again, when you compare this series to like Bloom Into You, which is a Yuri, which is so good, and Yuri handles the relationship between these two characters so well, and it's a very different story, and I understand it's very different, but I'm like, Bloom Into You handles the romantic aspect of the relationship so well, and then there's this where it's just like, I guess I shouldn't have been a prince. Like, you think? Are you sure? I could have told you that 5 episodes ago, bitch. Again, Ikuhara's like, it just took Utena a long time to get there. I did like the concept that they really made it seem like Akio could win, which I was so frustrated in the moment about, but that was very good for the audience to be like, is Akio going to win? Is he going to succeed? What's going to happen? And of course, I didn't like Himamiya getting stabbed with swords again and again and again. And we had the song, but the lyrics are kind of like, at this point, the lyrics sort of, they're kind of like what we've seen with the lyrics all along, right? I do like the idea that he keeps cutting at the door and it doesn't work. It's like, and they say it happens over and over again. It's so absurd. Yes, it is absurd. The song is correct. And then the frustrating part was that there is Akio, who is, again, Dios as well. So the prince, it's always been Akio from the start. And he's on the merry-go-round and he's like, oh, silly girl, you can't get through that door because it's eternity. You can't do that. Don't worry, I'll heal your wounds. I'll be your prince. And if it wasn't something we'd seen, like, again, the last 5 episodes, it was so sickening. And I'm sure that was the intent. That's the point, is to frustrate you beyond all of eternity, to be like, she doesn't need you. And again, I do appreciate that the series comes full circle. I guess one thing I would put on here that I do appreciate is the full circle prince moment. The full circle moment with the prince. The fact that we started out the series thinking the prince was this good all, this is who you should be, this is how it should be, this is what you should aspire to become. And then we see that, no, that's actually really bad. Don't become a prince. Don't try to save someone else, for your behalf and all of this. I liked the full circle moment where it's not cute anymore. It's sickening, right? The fact that and it's always been Akio. So him by her side. And I like that Utena's like, well, F this. I don't want to be a part of this. And so she, like, the sword breaks that he has because Akio's not doing what he's supposed to. He's not trying to connect to Anthy and let her save herself. He's trying to be a prince and control her. Right? And he keeps on saying the sword won't work either. The funny thing is that even at the very end, he's trying to open a door that cannot be opened, and it's his own fault because he can't ever see the right way. And so he's never going to get what he wants because it's something that's not attainable. The prince values are not attainable because they're just self-destructive. And Utena going to that damn door. The best part of this episode was when she grabbed Akio's face and shoved him away. I was like, good. I was like, thank God. I was like, good. Get him out of here. I was like, that was the best part of this episode, was her being like, fuck off. Shoving him away. And shoving him away. That was the best. I loved that. I was actually wondering when Wakaba would show up. I was waiting for Wakaba to show up. I forgot to mention it last episode, but I was like, you know who we haven't seen at all in this last section? We haven't seen Wakaba. So judging by the very end, does Wakaba become the new Utena? Is Wakaba the new Utena? Is she going to find lesbian love in this? I did love the visuals of Utena grabbing the roses and her hands becoming bloody from the thorns. I thought that was really good. The door becoming a coffin, the metaphor is good. I liked that. And then, of course, my thing was Himamiya just kind of gave up. She was just sitting there being like, eh. And Utena's like, Utena put in a lot of damn work to reach Anthy. And for it all to be up to Anthy in the end, I felt bad for Utena. I was like, damn, girl, you did all this work. And in the end, it didn't make a difference. Anthy was the one that had to choose to leave. But good try. I'm like, Anthy, when you meet up with Utena again, you better do some apologizing because you put Utena through the ringer to reach you. Like, girl didn't give up. And I appreciate the idea that Utena didn't give up. She was willing to hold her promise and keep to it, right? And Akio sitting there being like, I was like you once. And we see both versions of him. We see the prince version and him. I absolutely am disgusted by the idea of the drink because the drink is pink, which is like Utena's color. So the fact that he's slurping a drink that's her color is disgusting, and it's very sexual without being sexual. And he's like, well, but you trying to do this is not going to change anything. It's just a life, you're living a life dependent on another. And so, I mean, again, yeah, Anthe needed to save herself because the power of the prince. I wish Anthe could have done I wish there had been a moment during this whole sword thing of Anthe realizing what Utena is trying to do and for Anthe to realize her self-worth. I think the fact that Anthe never had an internal monologue where she questioned her self-worth and was like, wait, why is Utena doing the things that she's doing? Or when Utena opens up the coffin, Anthe doesn't have any moment of self-reflection. She's just like, oh, I don't deserve it. And Utena's like, bitch, take my damn hand. And then when she does, it doesn't end up working. She still goes back and it fails. And Utena did all of that work for nothing. And then at the end, Anthe was like, I guess I'll leave now. Like, I feel like that is the hindrance of this series being made in the 90s because I'm watching Dan to Dan. I'm watching Word of Honor. I've read Bloom Into You. There's all these more modern series that have taken such a nuanced approach to romance, the conversations between couples, talking about these issues and problems and working through it. And I'm a communications major. So I'm like, that's my jam. And this whole kind of abstract look at romance, I get the symbolism behind it. And if that's your jam, that's cool. But I need some more conversations. I need some more internalizing. I need more connecting with your audience and letting all of that sink in and soak into us. And I'm not saying make it obvious. I'm not saying that at all. But it would feel more powerful if you could really connect with Anthe so that moment when she leaves the school really hits fucking hard. And I just felt like it was like, all of this stuff happened, the world exploded, and then Anthe's like, I could have pressed the stop button at any moment, but now I am. It felt, I don't know. It wasn't as impressive to me as I'm sure it was to some people, because I'm like, I've seen it done better, and I just really wanted it to be better. And I did love Utena's plea to Himamiya, where she's like, don't you realize the only time I've ever been happy has been when I was with you. And I loved that. I loved Utena confessing that. Like Utena's confession was really good. I loved that. Utena's confession and her putting in the work. I loved that. I would have liked a montage. I would have taken a montage right now of all their moments together. But here's the thing. Other than the first act, they really haven't had a lot of moments together. So it wouldn't have been a very long montage. Now, would it? It'd be like the first 10 episodes. And then it would have been like, oh, well, actually, that is another thing is Utena's sexuality and their moments together is another frustration. I did realize looking back that the sweater that she was wearing in episode 36 or 37 is the sweater that Anthe was making in the episode where Nanami was the cow. That was the sweater. It looks a little different in episode 16, so it looks bigger on her in episode 37. And that's cute. That's a cute little subtle symbolism. That's nice. But I'll be real with you all. After episode 12, what moments do Utena and Anthe really have together until the end? Because during the Mikage arc, Utena is off being Mamiya. So there's not a lot of moments there. And then once Akio shows up, he kind of monopolizes her attention. There's not a lot of moments there. So if they had shown a montage of all the happy times that Utena was with Anthe, it would be like the first 10 episodes, the first third of the series. But then the other 2/3 of the series, there wouldn't be a lot of meat there to go back to. And that's kind of another frustration I have, is that we didn't really get a lot of, again, it's the 90s. 'Twas a different time. But you say that, and then you have series that are BL like Heart of Thomas, and then you have other series like Heart of Thomas, and you have, bless. I'm trying to think of it. My brain's at a blank. But there's series I looked at for Janyu Yaoi that were written in the 80s that talked about sexuality so like blatantly and in such great detail that it was happening in the 80s. There were those conversations, and there were series that did that and talked about it. And so I can't really say that it's an excuse of this series that was written in the 90s to not talk about that. I mean, Sailor Moon had Neptune and Uranus. that were pretty explicit. So I don't think that it's that the show was like, oh, we can't talk about lesbians, because I think that they could. It's just they try to be so subtle with it, and so like you've got to read between the lines to get the symbolism, that I'm like, that's cool, but if I really want to get invested in their romance, I need some concrete things to get invested in. And after episode 12, there's not a lot until the very end. And there was starting to be, like, episode 37 had the scene on the rooftop where they were starting to communicate, but then Anthe kind of backtracks and regresses. And so you're like, well, I guess, well, there was that, I guess. So it just, I want to air my frustrations with you because I want Utena and Anthe to deserve better. I want them to deserve more. So then her tears mix with her sweat and they crash down. And I do love the symbolism of it becoming the little droplet that goes to the rose crest that opens the door. That symbolism was really good. And that was a great callback. I was like, yes, awesome, fabulous. I love that Akio's in the middle slurping his drink. The one prince gets back on the carousel like, bye, bitch. Just that version of him's like, I'm not sticking around for this. And then she manages, suddenly the swords stop and Akio's like, what the hell? And there's a coffin. Instead of the gate, there's the coffin that was there from the whole time. And it's literally, I love the idea. I love the idea of the coffin and Utena opening it for someone else. Opening for Anthe. Because when Anthe said at the beginning, she's like, I can't be with you because you're a girl. I was like, you repressed women? What? So I do love that Akio was like, no, don't open the coffin. I love the symbolism of Utena opening it for someone else, not opening it for herself. She's come out of herself and now she's opening it for Anthe. And if that's the symbolism of her becoming a lesbian, okay, that's all we get, but okay. And so that's fine. I did love the idea and the concept that inside the coffin, in the same pose that Utena was in from the start, because we're paralleling all this, we're paralleling the Rose Brides, Anthe and Utena, who's forgotten, who's remembered. I love the light versus the dark there. I love that. I love the idea that we have that Dios and the power of the world. So the power of the world the entire time was Anthe. And realizing the power of herself. Like, that was the power. It wasn't a man that had all the power the whole time. It was Anthe. And that's fine. Am I frustrated that Utena, like, reaches for her and gets to her and she keeps up her promise? I like that Utena looks like how she looked in the original memory where she was crying. And she's like, oh, at last we meet. She's like, I'm finally meeting the real you. This whole wall you've had around you that you've had up the entire series to seem indifferent. I'm finally meeting who you are inside. Who you are inside. Now reach for my hand. Let me help you. If she's like, you need to leave this place or you're just going to end up in the same cycle over and over again. And so Anthe grabs for her hand tearfully and they manage to touch. But then, of course, the whole place shatters and she falls along with the coffin and metaphorically falls out of the tower. And I was so distraught because I thought that in that moment, because then Utena says, in the end, I couldn't be a prince. No shit. I guess another frustration is with the concept of the prince. What I had hoped was going to happen was that, because the series isn't trying to say that it's wrong to help someone and be supportive and to help someone in a crisis. The series isn't saying that it's wrong, and I don't think that it is. But what I was hoping was that Utena would shed away this concept of being, because it's literally been told to her 1,000 times at this point, you don't have to be a prince. Being a prince is not the goal. But I don't think that being a prince and supporting and helping someone are synonymous. There's a layer of control and possession and ego and possessiveness with being a prince that is not the same as just helping someone and loving someone. And I don't feel like being a prince and loving someone are the same. And I'm not saying the show is making that distinction, but for Utena to say at the very end, oh, I guess I couldn't be a prince. I'm like, I wanted her to go beyond that and to be like, I'm not trying to be a prince. My name is Utena and Tetsuya Utena, and I am here because I love you. And I wanted that to happen. I wanted them to grab hands, and for her to say, I love you, and I'm here as your support. And then if she fell, and if Anthy, and then in that moment, Anthy could have been like, I love you too, but I've got to save myself. And then they broke apart. Or something like that. That's what I needed. And for it to regress back to Utena being like, I guess I couldn't be a prince. I was like, what? No. That's what we've been talking about the whole time, that you can't do it. And she's like, forgive me for pretending to be a prince. I'm like, why couldn't you just be someone that loved and supported her? And then you two could have helped each other. Like, why? Why? And so then everything falls down and like the swords all come at her instead, which I'm not surprised by that symbolism. I do like that Wakaba's like, I just wanted to do homework with her. Like, okay. That was great. But then, yeah, everything falls apart because like you do. And then, so the Shadow Girls, we hear the Shadow Girls talking as we get to the epilogue. And the Shadow Girls start out our epilogue saying, what will you do when you graduate? And they're like, go to the high school here, of course. Or it's two people that are middle schoolers saying they're going to go to Otari Academy for high school. And they're like, well, I haven't really decided yet. I'm going to be an actress. And then we're back to this. So yeah, the thing that was really frustrating, and I'm sure it's intentional, is that, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And this is reality that we live in, blah, blah, blah. And so girls are still going to be girls. And I was just like, I felt like that it was demonstrating that within this world that Akio's cultivated, here is how these people act, and it's meant to be frustrating, and we're meant to be like Anthy and choose to leave that world and go somewhere else where that's not the case. But it was a bit frustrating to see these characters going through the motions like they've just forgot all over again. I guess it's meant to be frustrating. Like, we could look forward to our 10-year reunion to find out. Which, you know, is what Anthy and Utena hopefully will do. And they talk about the future. And so then they're like, I'll find a rich guy to marry. And like, it's like, you know, everything we've been taught is a bad idea. They just end up going towards it. It's like, And so then they talk about Utena, but they're slowly forgetting her. She used to be the one crying, Miss Utena, Miss Utena. And they're like, don't you know she was always dressed in boys' clothes and the teachers were chewing her out. So then Anthy's getting ready to leave the Rose Garden behind. And it said, wasn't she hospitalized a few months back? Did she meet Ruka in the hospital? I heard her friend or her boyfriend betrayed her. Well, or both. And she transferred to another school and that Akio expelled her because she couldn't do what he wanted anymore. And they're like, I guess it doesn't matter. That was so frustrating to hear it doesn't matter. I was like, oh, bitch, we spent this whole series following her. So then this whole deal where Mickey is setting up like our dear sweet lamb to be his replacement. I'm like, what? And he's with Kozu. At least he's with Kozu. I guess that's good. But he's setting up this poor boy to have like the timer as well. I'm like, he's helping me with my job next semester. I'm like, and then of course we have Toga and Saionji. I mean, like, oh, you're going to take more courses in your concentration. He's like, well, I want to catch up on what I missed while I was fooling around. He's like, fooling around? It's like, you know. So I'm like, are they together? I guess there's that. Here's my complaint about Nanami and this scene where she's like, the tea's ready. Because she's kind of transferred into Wakaba's role here where she's making tea for him. And then here's my complaint about the Nanami scene is that, again, I wasn't asking for much. But Toga's not going to apologize to Nanami. Toga's not going to have a conversation with his sister about everything that went down between them so many episodes ago. She's just going to be... And the fact that she's just sitting there being like, tea's ready, I'm making tea for you. Like, why is Nanami still there? Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she go somewhere else? Why is she complacent serving tea for her brother and his boyfriend? Like, I want to like it, but I also want justice for Nanami and for her to go off and do her own thing and not be stuck beside her brother all over again. Like, that's just, I don't know how to feel about that. At least he said thank you. At least Toga said thank you as they were going there. And then we had Juri. Now, I didn't mind Juri so much because we have Shiori there with Juri. I didn't mind that so much. That part was fine. That was okay. And they were all girls that were battling with Juri. Juri's got her own harem that she started. That part was fine. I did think the 3 guys that were after the girls with the notes and the 3 girls were like, no, and they shun away from him. That was really funny. Mikage's hall still destroyed. No more Mikage. And then, yeah, Akio's like, well, they're all going to forget she even existed. I hated that. I hated the idea that they're going to forget about Utena. And Choo Choo's really sad. That sucked. And then I did like that, thank God, Anthy was like, bye, and left. You can continue to stay in that cozy coffin of yours and continue to play Prince. That was such a good moment. And I loved that she said that, like, you can choose to stay in here and deny reality and have your little world, but I'm going to leave. Like, I loved that. I just wish it had felt more earned. And she's like, Utena's not gone. She's just not part of your world anymore. And then she just leaves. I do like her little outfit. It's super cute. And Choo Choo leaving with her, being like, now it's my turn to go. And she's like, wait for me, Utena. I don't know. I'd have some strong words when I found you and be like, bitch, what? You know, it was that easy for you to leave. And I know it wasn't. I'm not saying that it was. That's the whole point, is that Anthy was a victim, and it takes a lot of courage to leave an abusive relationship. It takes a lot of courage to leave an abusive relationship. It's hard. It takes a lot. I'm glad Anthy's getting a new life for herself. I'm glad she looks so happy and she's cut her hair and she looks great. I just felt that for it being such a powerful moment, I felt we needed a little bit more about Anthy to make it feel even more powerful. I wanted to feel moved, but I was just kind of like, I didn't feel moved, damn it. And I wanted to feel moved by the end of this. And so then we get to the very end where I'm glad I would take a new photo. I would chuck that one with Akio in it. I would get rid of that. If you ever have a problem, come to me first. And then they have that line of, I want us to be friends like that. I'm like, and someday together we'll shine. I'm like, I wanted that conversation to come back way earlier than the last seconds of the epilogue. Like, I needed that line to come back between them earlier. I love the symbolism of Anthy leaving. I love it. I love the symbolism of Anthy leaving. I'm glad that she left. I'm glad that was a moment. That was good. I'm a bit frustrated by the ending because there were things that I thought could have been handled so well and they chose to go a different route with it. And I guess that's the problem when you start to theorize how you think it should end. And then they're like, no, we're going to do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. It was fine. It's a fine ending. I don't know what the movie's going to do. Like, what is the movie even going to be? Like, I guess is the movie going to be Anthy trying to find Utena and then going through like what the duelists are doing in this other world? Like Wakaba's now the new Utena in a way because she has a friend now that's glomping her at the window. I don't know. I have no clue what the movie's going to be about. And then after the revolution, I hope that it's of at least Anthy and Utena. I want more Anthy and Utena moments. I think that's my big thing. I want Anthy and Utena to have conversations, to go on and do things, to talk about stuff, to have their relationship. Like, I want to see them in a relationship because that's what I felt the series has promised me. And I'm like, ugh. So we'll see. I'm very sorry if I'm not gushing about the ending of this series, like I'm sure many of you have. I'm sure some of you think this is the most amazing ending in the world, and that is fine. You are valid. You are valid so much. I think since episode 31, I've been very hesitant about this series, and especially after episode 33, I was like, is this going to stick the landing? And the third act's hard. Third act of any story is hard. I'm not going to pretend that it's not. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts. Please be gentle with me. I may go back by the time that we get to the live stream and go back through this. I may think it's the best thing since sliced bread, but I don't know. I had all of these expectations and wantings, and this series being limited by being in the 90s. Here's my other thing, probably helped hold it back. Here's my other thing, is just Akio and I guess Toga by equivalent, but Toga I don't feel is necessary for. Akio just kind of gets off. And one of my least favorite, going back to one of my least favorite comments, is when people's like, that's how it is in the real world. I'm like, well, we know that because we all are in the real world, but this is a fictional story. You can literally do anything you want to in a fictional story. And so for Akio just to go about like business as normal, and even him, like, when Anthy's leaving, like, I wanted to see the tower crumble, or to see him, like, he shouts after her, but that's all we get. Like, I wanted to see him take more responsibility for what he's done. And the show's just like, well, in the real world, but I'm like, in the real world, I feel like some of them do take responsibility, or they get stuff, you know, and I know that's a hard topic to talk about, but it would have felt more satisfying, I think, especially as someone who's gone through something like that, to see him have to bear more responsibility. But at least Anthy leaves. That's the important part, is that she got out of that situation. That's the important part, is that Utena and Anthy don't have to deal with Akio anymore. That's the important part at the end of the day. So good for them. Good for them getting out and not having to deal with it. But yeah. I hope that the movie, by the time I see the movie, maybe I will have more insight into how I feel, and will have simmered and stewed on it some more, and go back and rewatch this episode and rethink about it and how I feel about it. I like it. I liked this ending. I'm not totally disappointed. I know I may have said that in the reaction because that was my initial like, oh, that's it. But I don't mind this ending. It's just not as good as I was expecting it to be. I was expecting, like, I don't know what I was expecting, but I was expecting it to give me a more emotional response. And I think my frustrations kept me from being as emotionally impacted as I could have been. So we'll see how the movie translates with that. And then the after the revolution. So I'm sorry if this wasn't as I wasn't like fangirling out as much as you'd want me to, but I'm sorry. I wish I could have been in a better mood for it. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. But anyway, I do look forward to see, as long as you're nice in your comments, and you can be critical and just be humor me. But anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts down below. Next week we'll look at the movie and see what that's all about and go from there. So anyway, in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back very soon with more Revolutionary Girl Utena. Bye!